Welcome to today's IBT ABC UTC Research Seminar. The presentations in these seminars highlight research work at the IBT ABC UTC's partner universities. Each seminar consists of a 40-minute presentation followed by a 15-minute question and answer session. My name is Kathy Kroll. I'm a co-director of technology transfer at the IBT ABC UTC. I'll be moderating today's seminar. We're pleased to welcome participants at approximately 600 registered sites for today's seminar. I am assisted today by Paul Wilds, formerly Georgia State Bridge Engineer, and Jamal El Kaisi, formerly FHWA. Paul and Jamal will be moderating the question and answer session. Our featured presentation today is using DOG and magnetic field to accurately detect corrosion in steel strands embedded in concrete. The project will be presented by our UTC Director, Dr. Ator Aziz Namini, Dr. Kenneth Burton, and PhD candidate student Carlos Concha, all at Florida International University. Before we get started with the presentation, upcoming events to announce. First and foremost, the 2026 World Bridge Engineering Conference that is coordinated by the IBT ABC UTC will be held in Miami, Florida, December 1st and 2nd in 2026. This conference is co-sponsored by the US DOT and over 33 state DOTs. Here are the details. There will be 140 technical presentations, 7 keynote talks, more than 40 exhibitors, a reception, and awards program. There will also be 3 included workshops, a half day on what bridge engineers should know about AI on November 30th, a full day on non-destructive testing, also on November 30th, and a full day on automated sprayable UHPC, which will be on December 4th. Registration is open. Early bird registration closes on August 14th. So please get registered early to save on registration costs. The hotel block is available for reservations at a special conference rate. We'll be at the Hyatt Regency Hotel in downtown Miami. This is a very busy time of year in Miami, so make your reservations while the conference rate rooms are still available. There are a limited number of exhibit hall spots remaining, so those interested in exhibiting are encouraged to sign up quickly. We are accepting award nomination submissions for Innovative Bridge Engineer of the Year, Innovative Bridge Owner Agency of the Year, and project awards for both ABC and IBT in the categories on the screen. The deadline for award submissions is September 30th. Again, see our website and/or use the QR codes on the screen for additional information and submissions. I already mentioned the automated sprayable UHPC workshop that will be held in conjunction with the conference on December 4th. We also wanted to note that an additional automated sprayable UHPC workshop will be held in 2027 at a date yet to be determined in collaboration with Georgia DOT. Final note on the conference, the first annual Transportation Infrastructure Summit sponsored by the University Transportation Center of the US DOT, will be held in conjunction with the World Bridge Engineering Conference. I hope to see many of you in person in Miami for this valuable and interesting conference. On to other events. Our next monthly webinar will be on Thursday, August 27th from 1 to 2:15 Eastern. The presentation will be Advancing Caltrans Bridge and Structures Project Delivery with BIM for Infrastructure. Registration is open. Also coming up quickly, on November 8th, is our annual in-depth web training. This event is similar to our monthly webinar series, but goes from 11 a.m. to 3:15 p.m. Eastern, giving us additional time to delve deeper into a particular topic. This year's topic will be Accelerated and Innovative Bridge Deck Repair. Our speakers include Graham Bettis, former TxDOT bridge engineer, who will be talking about the decision to repair versus replace. David Whitmore with Vector Corrosion will be talking about corrosion management topics. Charlie Young with BDI will be presenting on non-destructive testing methods. And Tristan Siegel with Colorado DOT will be presenting case studies with focus on installation methods, including hydro demolition. Mark your calendars for this educational event. Registration is open. Before I introduce the presenters, I'll review some housekeeping items. Many of you may know these webinars are recorded and posted on the IBT ABC UTC website in the section titled Research Seminar Archives. So you can access this and all previous seminars for future learning and to share with interested colleagues. You can download the PDF during the training session. It will also be posted in the archives. Lastly, this presentation will be followed by approximately 15 minutes of question and answer. The seminar today features the IBT ABC UTC research project on using dog and magnetic field to accurately detect corrosion in steel strands embedded in concrete. This project was conducted at Florida International University. We're pleased to introduce our presenters, our own UTC director, Dr. Atora Zizanamini, Dr. Kenneth Burton, and PhD student Carlos Concha. Welcome, Dr. Zizanamini.
All right. Thank you, Kathy. This presentation, this slide kind of shows you the overview of the presentation. What you're going to see in this presentation is really three parts. The first part that I will give, and that's going to be the introduction. What is the problem that we are trying to solve, and what is the best non-destructive techniques to assist us. Part two is going to be given by Dr. Forton. Is a very innovative and interesting idea using the odor and the dog to detect the corrosion. And part three is on MFL. I will explain what the MFL is and so on. And then we will conclude by the summary and conclusion. So part one, the issue that many state bridge engineers really tackle is how do we inspect the health of the steel strands in where we cannot see. As an example, I mean, there are several cases. This could be segmental concrete bridge that we have let's say, for example, external tendons, or we can have internal tendons, and these are not visible to the naked eyes. In fact, if you look at the segmental concrete bridge, usually the superstructure rates very high, 7, 8. But at the same time, really, the challenge is that, okay, what is the state of the steel strand that is not visible to the naked eye? Over the years that I've been involved in detecting the basically corrosion or assessing the health of the steel strand in the segmental concrete bridge, in my opinion, I think magnetic flux leakage method at the present time is the best method that is available. I will elaborate on some other techniques that may have some applications. Now, MFL, I'm going to explain what the MFL is. MFL is like, you can look at it as like an MRI machine, that as a patient you go under the machine, so and the magnetic field is generated, and you can see basically the different organs and so on. So the MFL is really kind of equivalent of the MRI for the bridge. Now, the good news is that this MFL is applicable to both internal tendons and external tendons. By internal tendons, I mean, let's say, for example, in the segmental concrete bridge, you can have a hole in the slabs, in the walls, in the top and the bottom, and then you have a steel strand in there. That's what I mean by internal tendon. External tendon mean that the tendons that are visible. MFL has limitations. MFL cannot be used in the areas where the tendons are interrupted, like deviators that you have, or anchorage area. In my opinion, the only method that I know of that could be applicable to the anchorage area or a deviator area is an X-ray. Now, many problem actually happens in the anchorage areas, but MFL is not has a limitation that you cannot apply to the areas where the anchorage is located. So let's discuss a little bit about what is the MFL. Now, MFL, or magnetic flux leakage method, is really in a simple term. When you have a magnet, I'm showing a bar. In the bottom, you see a bar, and then you see a magnet in a yoke shape. Place a magnet in the vicinity of a steel bar, you create what's called a flux. Imagine this is like having an airflow. between the poles, North Pole and South Pole of the magnet. Now, when there is a section loss due to the corrosion or the wire breakage, that airflow or the flux is interrupted, causes the flux to change, to leak, and that's where the name leak comes in, magnetic flux. So the flux leaks because of the corrosion or a section loss and so on. Now we put a Hall sensor, and a Hall sensor is able to monitor the flux. When there is a change in the flux, the Hall sensors detects that by changing the voltage output. And that voltage output is what we use to try to say what the condition is. Now, this is a busier slide, but concentrate just on the bottom. You see it like a sinusoidal. So here you see that, for example, here's a sinusoidal. So when you cross a abnormality or a section loss, you get in general, you get signals like this. It's not usually as clean as what you see over here. And another thing that I should say, this method is not something that, for example, you can just take a device and then go and then try to basically inspect something. You have to have some experience, some trained eyes, because the signal sometimes is modified based on what else is there. So in general, there are two methods of the MFL, what I call as an active MFL or residual MFL. So let's see what each one does. Active MFL is you build a device that includes the Hall sensors and the magnet. So you are taking the signal while the magnet is present. So that's why we say active MFL method. Disadvantage of this method in general is that the magnet is, depending on what kind of magnet you use, you can use a permanent magnet or you can use an electromagnet. And usually the magnet is very heavy, and to incorporate a magnet inside the non-destructive equipment that also has the Hall sensors makes the equipment very heavy. Now, you're going to see that for external tendon, actually we are using an active MFL. What we have been able to do to develop an equipment that, including the magnet, weighs only 12 or 13 pounds, and it's very upright. But in general, active MFL is heavy because magnet, if using a permanent magnet, you're going to have to use it adds the weight. And if you use an electromagnet, that's really heavy. Residual MFL is you magnetize the strands first, and then you come back and with a non-destructive device, you monitor basically the flux, and that's called the residual MFL. So each one of them have an advantage and a disadvantage. But in our method, you're going to see that we are using active MFL, but we've been able to develop the equipment so that it's only 12 pounds. I mentioned that the MFL is applicable to both internal tendons and external tendons. Now, the focus of this presentation is on external tendons, but we have done lots of work that was sponsored by Florida DOT on the internal tendons, and I'm going to just show you just an overview because I know some people might be interested in that. Back in the 2012, actually, we with the project that was sponsored by the Florida DOT, we conducted extensive work trying to identify all the available technologies that are available for assessing the health of the steel strand in the internal tendon. We published the two reports that's available from the Florida DOT back in the 2012. And this report has all the different non-destructive techniques that are available out there in order to inspect basically steel strand that are inside basically the thickness of the wall or a slab or a ceiling. In my opinion, like I said, again, even for internal tendons, really the best method is the MFL. Just overview very briefly. I'm not going to show you lots of results really, because our focus is on the external tendon. But for internal tendons, we've been doing lots of work over the years, and in fact, I've been inspecting some of the segmental concrete bridge. including the Missouri Bridge back when I was faculty at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. I've inspected the major segmental concrete bridge, the entire span of it between the Nebraska and the Missouri. So we've been actually in FIU, we have brought segments of a segmental concrete bridge that was taken out of service, not because of because of the condition, but because of the rerouting the roads, basically. Now, this shows the segments from one end. Now, good for us, but unfortunate for the bridge. Actually, there were a couple of ducts that was not grouted. Now, that allowed us to place steel strands with a known corrosion level and then assess our technology. Now, in the case of the internal tendons, the challenge really is that the fact is that you have mild steel, and those mild steel mask the signal. But we've been able to solve that problem and able to assess the health of the steel strand inside. These are some of the results that we have obtained. Interestingly, the signal that we get, I do not know the reason for that. I have not been able to find the reason, but when I subtract the x coordinate of the 2 points in the signal, that equals exactly the thickness of the slab. We have tried our methodology for internal tendons on a bridge in Florida, and this is a device for internal tendons that we have. And we've been able to, for the bridge that I showed you, able to detect the area where there was a possibility of corrosion, and that was verified by drilling a hole and looking at basically with the borescope. And our signal and the borescope, basically they confirmed that with borescope we saw the corrosion. With our device for internal tendons, we were able to detect the corrosion. The focus of today is on the external tendons. Here you see a photo of an inside of a segmental concrete bridge. Again, our limitations are that we are not able to do any inspection of the deviator or in the anchorage area. Sometimes you have basically these ducts are very close to the ground, or they are very close together. We have two devices, and you will see later that is able to inspect the straight portion. We wrap all the way around, or if the tendons is such that we don't have any clearance from one side, either in the ceiling or the bottom, it can wrap just in a half a circle form. Again, the limitation, like I said, of the MFL is that we cannot inspect the anchorage areas or the deviator area. In my opinion, I think the best thing is the X-ray in that area. Now I'm going to turn it to Dr. Ken Forton, who is going to present the very interesting concept using dogs to detect the corrosion in external tendon.
Thank you, Arturo. Looking forward to sharing with you some pretty exciting research that we've done related to canine corrosion detection. I'm a professor in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. And my first slide I want to show you is related to the fact that dogs have been used for hundreds of years for detection work. Most people are used to drug detection, explosives detection, maybe even microbes like mold detector dogs, human scent for tracking people, and so forth. And the only other work in this area that we're aware of was some early work on corrosion under insulation of pipes that Dr. Ade Schoen in the Netherlands, who's somebody I've collaborated with, has done. So on the next slide, I show kind of an overview of, we've been here at FIU, we've had over 30 years of experience in looking at not only helping to train and certify detection canines, but also identify the volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, from targets. So we've done accelerants, biologicals, currency, drugs, explosives, firearms, and so forth. And most recently, like during COVID-19, we were the first in the country to deploy COVID-19 detector dogs at Miami International Airport, and they were extremely reliable, able to detect COVID is in a partnership with American Airlines and Miami International Airport, where if the COVID dogs alerted, then the employees would go home and get tested with the PCR, and the dogs are actually more accurate than the PCR tests. So we know dogs can be very reliable. The question is, can they detect corrosion with that same level of reliability? On my next slide, I give you an illustration of what we've done in the past. Again, if you look at drugs or explosives or humans, what happens is the dogs do not alert to the parent substance. They don't alert to cocaine. They actually alert to methylbenzoate, which is the odor of cocaine. And once you know what the odorant is, you could potentially develop a sensor to help confirm what the dogs do, but that's a whole nother step. And so with ecstasy or MDMA, the odor molecule is pyperenol. And so we train with what's called a mimic odor. We train dogs on pyperenol, and they can find ecstasy or MDMA very reliably. So in this study, we utilize that as part of our study. So on the next slide, I show you the sort of the 4 tasks that we worked on. One is, can dogs actually be trained to detect the odors within concrete structures? Can we're looking at different corrosion products, and then also looking at the odor coming out of concrete cylinders. And then finally identifying the VOCs, or the volatile chemicals, that are associated with corrosion for potential training aid development, either for canine or a machine in the future. You'll see in this next slide, though, the first thing we did was to use pyperenol, because this case we used working bomb dogs that were trained for ecstasy. We know that they can detect pyperenol as the volatile chemical of ecstasy, or MDMA. We put those into our low-density polyethylene bags, something we call the controlled odor mimic permeation system. And then we put those into 3 odor strands tied into strips of wood, and then we filled cylinder molds with concrete, with cement, and we cured it for 28 days to see whether the odor would even permeate out of concrete. And you'll see on the next slide that it's kind of an illustration of this. So what happens is, in my experience working with detection canines for over 30 years, there's almost no way to completely prevent odor from coming out of encapsulation. And that could be, Tupperware, or, even high density polyethylene tubes, things of that nature. Usually the odor will come out to a level that the canines are able to alert. So I'll show you a video in the next slide where we basically have this pyperenol within concrete, and then the dogs are trained to a passive alert, or a sit. So it's essentially a lineup, and if the odor is there, and we did this many times with multiple canines, we know that the odor is permeating through the concrete. And actually, we'll do it one more time so you can see you can watch this is a double-blind study. The dog and the handler they do not know which one contains the pyperenol. And then we did a headspace analysis using gas chromatography, mass spectrometry of those cylinders. And you'll see the pyperenol peak, but you also see a variety of other chemicals that are there. So we are in the process now. This is an ongoing study. This is not a complete study, of trying to identify what are the other odor chemicals that are there, so that the dogs could be trained on corrosion odors for increasing the potential for using canines in this application. So the next slide shows you can dogs be reliably trained just to detect rust odor without them even being encased in concrete. So we took 5 grams of rust in the form of iron oxide in these low density polyethylene bags where we had the pyperenol before, and we did black rust and red rust. And you'll see in the next video a lineup, and these are with the different dogs. These are beagles that were not trained. They're not law enforcement. They're just trained for odor detection. And in this case, it's very clear these dogs are trained with a lineup. If the odor's there, they sit or stare and wait for the reward. And all these dogs are reward trained, so they just get praise or food or whatever they like to do. So beagles like to eat, so these dogs got food. And then the next task, if you go to the next slide, you'll see that then we wanted to say, okay, if you took those same rust samples, put them inside concrete, again, there's no pyranol or any other odor, and these dogs had never experienced corrosion before this, will they be able to alert to the corrosion materials within concrete samples? And so if you look at this next video, you'll see a lineup with the rust within the concrete. And you'll see one of the things that's exceptional with the canines is they're very, very quick. So they have a high degree of mobility, and they're trained to go to whatever the highest concentration of the odor is, if there's odor there. And then in task 3, we did a number of dogs. So we did this with 5 different canines, and these are the beagles in this particular test. And you see that we were able to receive a very high level of sensitivity and specificity. It's we're still we have other dogs that we've been doing work with that we're also going to combine all this information into an article we're going to be publishing. But in general, they really have remarkable selectivity, sensitivity and specificity in terms of identifying the location. And then if we switch to searching localized corrosion, so these were 10 wire strands in 10-foot structures within high density polyethylene tubes. And we trained a different group of dogs. These were working dogs, but they had not ever been trained on corrosion or propirenol. And we trained them on the same corrosion samples, and then we're looking to see if they could localize the area. So you'll see in the next video, one of those dogs doing the search. And again, the dogs are trained just to, when they find the odor, they stop, sit, and then they wait for their reward. In this case, it's a boy. And then what we're currently doing, as I mentioned, this is an ongoing study. It's not ready for deployment yet, because we're looking at the ability of odor to permeate out of high density polyethylene, and also we're looking at the samples, the volatile chemicals within the samples. So what we found is we see a lot of very consistent chemicals within corroded steel rod samples using these materials that we've working with Dr. Aturad's group. So it's the same kind of materials that, in fact, we've done some side-by-side where we use his technique with the sensor, and then the dogs immediately afterwards. We're trying to figure out, okay, what are the odors that the dogs are alerting to? So there are odors that they're able to alert to. We haven't completed this, but what it appears to be, at least an early indication, is that there's probably microbes. So some of these compounds that are very consistently seen are what we call MVOCs, or microbial volatile organic compounds. So there's probably a microbial component when the steel starts to corrode, and then those microbes are producing volatiles that the dogs are able to detect. Because if you just take corroded, iron oxide has very little smell itself, and there's iron oxide everywhere. So it's the question is, well, how would dogs be able to localize a specific area of corrosion? And depending on how much corrosion, will there be more odor? And if there's this microbial component that actually adds a strong component, that this could be a very interesting complementary technique to using the sensor detection. And with that, I'll turn it back to Adirad.
All right, thank you, Ken. So at this point, actually, we are gonna turn back to magnetic flux leakage method as applied to external tendon. One of my students, Carlos, has been assisting on this project. Now, Carlos is traveling, but he did record a video, so his portion of the presentation is going to be in a video, and I will show you the video.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I would like to thank Dr. Asisinamini and Dr. Furto for their presentation in the previous sections. Unfortunately, I am traveling today and I was not able to participate in person. So I have prepared this video instead. I hope you find it informative and useful. My name is Carlos Conchavila and I am a PhD student at Florida International University, FIU. The final part of this webinar is dedicated to the experimental results obtained using the magnetic flux leakage method, MFL, as Dr. Asisinamine clearly explained a few minutes ago. So, let's begin. Two active MFL devices have been developed. One of them is a full ring device, like the one shown in the pictures, which allows the entire duct to be enclosed and scanned. However, as shown in one of the previous images, ducts are often located very close to the floor, and for that situations, a hard device was also developed. As mentioned earlier, both devices use the active MFL method, meaning that the magnetic field is actively generated by the permanent magnets, while the Hall effect sensors simultaneously measure the magnetic response. Using this device, several experiment tests were conducted, which I will describe in detail in the following slides. The ultimate goal of this research is to detect corrosion in strands embedded inside ducts. However, we started by evaluating a simplified scenario in which discontinuities were created by introducing simulated cuts in the strands. In the first image, you can see the transparent duct that was used during these experiments. The transparency allowed us to clearly observe the simulated cuts, as shown in the second image. In the top image, you can see all the strands used in the test. Most of them are continuous and extend from one end of the pipe to the other end. However, a few of these contain simulated cuts. The initial objective was to determine whether the device could successfully detect these discontinuities. This slide shows the results of 4 tests performed using the previous setup. In the first figure, we have a scenario where 40% of the strands have simulated cuts. Out of the 40 total strands, 24 remains continuous, while 16 contain cuts. The red dashed lines indicate the approximate location of the simulated cuts, and each corollary curve represents the voltage measured by one of the Hall sensor effects. For example, the purple curve corresponds to the sensor 4. As you clearly see, the signal experiences a significant disturbance when the device reaches the section containing the cuts. Before that region, the signal remains relatively stable, showing only small fluctuations due to measurement noise. However, as soon as the device enters the damaged section, a strong disturbance appears in the signal, effectively indicating that the magnetic flux leakage is occurring and that this region should be inspected. The same procedure was repeated with 30%, 20%, and 10% simulated cuts which corresponds to only 4 code strands out of 40. And in every case, the signal disturbance can still be clearly identified. The final test in this series was performed with only 5% simulated cuts. In other words, only 2 of the 40 strands contain cuts. Even with such a small percentage, the signal disturbance can still be clearly observed. At this point, however, an important question naturally arises. So far, we have shown that the device can clearly identify abrupt discontinuities, such as strand cuts. But corrosion is typically not an abrupt break. Instead, it's a gradual deterioration of the strands over time. So, the natural questions become, can the device also detect actual corrosion? And that's exactly the question that we will evaluate next. To answer those questions, some of the strands were artificially corroded using an accelerated corrosion process consisting of a saltwater bath and a DC power supply, as shown in the photograph. The second image shows one of the corroded strands. Unlike the previous simulated case, the damage here is gradual rather than abrupt, and it's also non-uniform, with some regions experiencing more severe deterioration than others. The orange line represents the corrosion profile along the strand. For the next text, we use 23 healthy strands and one corroded strand. At its most critical section, the corroded strands plots approximately 57% of his cross-sectional area. Considering all 24 strands together, this corresponds to only about a 2.4 loss percentage of the total street area in that section. So, compared to the previous tests, the overall loss is much smaller, and the damage is gradual rather than abrupt. The objective is to determine whether the device is still capable of identifying it. It's also important to note the location of the corroded strand. It's positioned away from the dark surface, meaning it's relatively far from both the magnets and the sensor. And even though the corroded strand is located farther away from both the magnets and the sensors, we can still observe a clear disturbance in the signal, precisely in the location where the maximum cross-sectional loss occurs. As soon as the device reaches the beginning of the corroded strand, this area, the voltage signal is affected, while it remains stable everywhere else. It's true that this disturbance is smaller than in the previous test involving the simulated cuts. However, we should remember that the corroded strand is farther from the device, and the overall system has experienced only about a 2.4% loss of steel area. And despite these challenging conditions, the disturbed region still clearly identifies the location of the corrosion. What happens if the corroded strand is located closer to the dock surface, and therefore closer to both the magnets and the sensors? As expected, the signal disturbance becomes much more pronounced. We can clearly see that sensor 3, the shown in orange, strongly detects the defect, while sensor 2, that is shown in green, also registers a smaller response. And observation is very important because this observation provides another insight. That is, not only can we identify the damage section along the length of the pipe, but by analyzing the responses from the different sensors, we can also estimate the approximate circumferential location of the defect within the dock. In this case, sensor 3 experiences the largest disturbance. Sensor 2, the green one, shows smaller responses, and sensor 1 and 4, the purple and the blue one, exhibit almost no disturbances. Then, from this pattern, we can infer that the corroded strand is located near the middle of the dock and closer to sensor 3 than to sensor 2. Then, once we have this analysis, another important question arises. So far, we have shown that the device can detect both simulated cuts and actual corrosion. However, in real breaches, ducts are typically filled with grout. So, if the duct is grouted, will the device still be able to detect corrosion? And short history, the answer is yes. In this experiment, a duct containing 26 strands was filled out with grout, as can be shown in the picture. 23 strands were healthy, while 3 strands have been artificially corroded. The test was performed using the full-range device, which is why 8 sensors are shown in the figure. And we can clearly observe that for sensor 7, the pink one, and especially sensor 6, the brown one, identify the location of the damage region where the corroded strands are located. Then, these results clearly demonstrate that using the MFL method, the proposed devices are capable of detecting corrosion even under realistic conditions with grouted ducts. Finally, I have included a short video showing the device in operation. The idea is to observe the behavior of the signal. When no defects are present, the signal should remain stable, and when the device reaches the damaged region, in this case the 3 corroded strands, then the signal becomes disturbed. This is a lab version of the MFL device that the total weight is about 12 pounds, based, as mentioned before, in the active magnetic fluid leakage method, and has a fast and reliable operation. Then I am going to reproduce the video. As you can see, the signal remains stable during the initial part of the scan, indicating that no defects are present, except some measurement noise. But as soon as the device reaches the corroded section, then the same signal disturbance that we observed in the previous plots appear. And we can clearly see that one. And then at the end part of the duct that there is no defects, also the signal is stable. Well, that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention and participation, and I hope you have a wonderful day. And now, Dr. Asisinamini is going to finish the.
All right. So, summary and the conclusion. First of all, we would like to make some acknowledgement. We would like to say thank you to Florida DOT and the US DOT-sponsored University Transportation Center at FIU, IBT, ABC, UTC for their support. I would like to say thank you to Mr. Pablo Orozco of FDOT, who is the project manager for the portion of the project that was funded by FDOT for external tendons. We also want to mention that opinions expressed in this presentation are those of the presenters and does not necessarily reflect the opinion of the research sponsors. In summary, really what you saw, MFL is applicable to both internal and external tendons, and we saw that. The question of the internal tendons, like I said, is very complex because there are mild reinforcement, but we've been able to resolve that over 2 decades of the research in this area, and we have applied to the field. So internal tendons, we have developed the technology and we have applied it to the field. The focus of this presentation was on external tendon, that in my opinion is much easier problem to handle than internal tendons. And as you saw, the method is fairly accurate. Our objective is to really at some point to combine. The more data points we have, the better it is. Have basically the odor detection by dog, the work that Dr. Ken Fortune is doing, and combine it with the MFL, and combine basically the more data that you have, the more confidence you have what part of the external tendon you need to open up and inspect visually. The component, like Dr. Ken Fortune said, the component of the research related to use of dog is still under the research, but it is very promising. So it is not at the point of field implementation, that portion. The MFL technology to assess the condition of steel strand, the external tendon, on the other hand, is field implementable. The accuracy of the MFL to assess the condition of a steel strand in the dog is extremely good. In fact, in the laboratory, we are able to go 2.5% section loss. And what we are saying earlier, the accuracy is about 5% or so. MFL method, as I mentioned, has limitations. Areas near the deviators and the anchorage regions cannot be inspected by using the MFL method. X-ray, in my opinion, is the best way to do that. And finally, I can say based on I've been conducting research in this area more than 25 years. Based on the many years of research, in my opinion, the MFL method is the best available method right now to assess the health of the steel strands embedded in internal or external tendons. So by that, we conclude our presentation. So Kathy.
Very good. Thank you to today's presenters. That was a very interesting and informative presentation. Paul and Jamal will now moderate the Q&A session. Paul, if you'd join us.
Okay, we've got a few questions, some that came in beforehand and some that are still coming in, I guess, from the presentation. Anyway, the first one we'll have, some of these will be some of the original ones. We'll ask some of the dog questions first. What breeds are most sensitive and trainable, and can this sensory capability be increased through even more selective breeding?
That's a great question. So AKC has over 205 different canine breeds, and it turns out almost any dog can be trained for odor detection based on previous work over the last 30 years. But as the question, so in terms of sensitivity, most dogs, even though some dogs, larger dogs have more olfactory cells, so theoretically they should be more sensitive. There's more variation within a breed than between breeds. So it's all about selecting the right dog. And then it gets into trainability. So most of the dogs are selected because how well they're able to be trained. So within the AKC herding group, most police dogs are like German Shepherds or Belgian Malinois because they're the herding class and they go out searching for people and stuff like that. Or they come from the sporting class, which like a Labrador Retriever, or some terrier groups. And I showed you the hound group as well, because they have probably the best sense of smell would be the hound group, but they're not as trainable sometimes. So it really kind of varies depending on the preference, right? And you could train a toy group and have a pocket dog, but they're usually a little bit more temperamental. Like you don't want your Chihuahua biting somebody's foot when you're out there inspecting a bridge. And then to the last part of that question, there has been work over the years looking at whether you could do selective breeding to increase the sensitivity, but that has not been very successful, and it's probably not needed because the dogs are very sensitive. It's really about selecting the dogs that want to work and the dogs that have a good sense of smell, and you can test that. And then some of it is in the size of the dog, right? And I've talked to this with Professor Azizamini in terms of, a smaller dog might be useful to put in within certain bridge structures and stuff than, a larger dog. So that it really comes down to size and trainability.
Okay. How much time and cost goes into training a dog?
Typically it takes initially, if you just have a brand new dog, which we call like a green dog that you've selected, it takes maybe about 400 hours to get them to be very reliable, to get into that 90, 95, 99% reliability. So that can take, 10 weeks. But if you work with them all the time, if you're doing like a 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and in like 5 weeks, you can get the dog trained. And so there are, part of that is selecting the right dog. So companies that train dogs for applications, which there is no, this is still, in the development stage, but like say like a mole dog or even let's say a drug dog, the cost of a fully trained dog, if you're going to purchase it, is around like 15,000, which may sound like a lot, but part of it is because you have to select the canine. But if you think about it, the dog's life cycle is about the same as an instrument, so it's about 10 years. And most instruments, if you're going to be using them, are probably in that range anyway. So it's a pretty competitive using a biological or electronic detector in terms of if you're going to have multiple or complementary detectors. That's sort of the range right now.
Okay, and are there devices being developed that could also detect corrosion odors?
Yes, so we have actually here at FIU, from the work we've done with drugs and explosives, we've been working on developing odor sensors that could be either mounted onto instruments, robots, or it could be handheld. And then what you do is you collect the odor onto a pad, and then you could run that in your GC-MS spec, or you can put, we use molecularly imprinted polymers, MIPs, and you can have a direct electronic readout. So we've done this for things like methylbenzoate, the odor of cocaine, and for DNT, the odor of dynamite. We've never done it for corrosion, but it's definitely possible once we identify those volatile chemicals. An electronic odor sensor could be used to complement the magnetic instrument.
Okay, Ken. Now we got some questions for Ettore. The first one is there an output that documents the strand corrosion? Those graphs they were showing, is that printable?
You can print it if you want, but right now basically we develop a Excel sheet as we conduct a test on the screen we see it, but you can print it too if you want to. But if the question is that if there is a report out on this, no, not yet.
Okay. Ettore, do these technologies quantify the extent of corrosion or simply detect the presence of it?
No, we are not quantifying. We are able to say where there is activity. Now you can have some idea on the level of the corrosion, but with the method that we are using, we are not identifying the percentage section loss.
Okay. Then could this technology be used to assess strands underwater by a diver or by a topside team with a diver supporting the measuring underwater?
Yes, you could, because the permeability of the magnetic field really is the same through the water or through the air or through the ducts. That's why, for example, if you have a plastic duct, we are able to see now. Even if you have a metal duct, we are able to. Metal duct is used for internal tendons, but we are able to go through the metal duct. The reason for that is because the mass of the area of the steel strand is much more than the metal duct that's there. So the metal duct is not able to mask the signal. So the answer to your question is yes, you can do that.
Okay.
I have not done the test, but you should be able to do it.
Okay. The next one we have here is could the MLF device detect a defect in strands located in the bottom of the duct as opposed to the top? I suspect it could. You showed it the sensors around it.
Actually, the device, the slides that the Carlos used showed only half of the device. The device, if you are able to wrap completely around it, then you can actually tell what portion of the pipe there is a corrosion. Now, where there is, let's say, for example, if there is a tendon that is just touching the ceiling or touching the floor, we have a different device that is like a half a circle. Now, if you use that half a circle, and let's say, for example, the corrosion is at the very bottom of, and the sensor is not able to wrap completely around, then it will be challenged at that point.
Okay. How would we know that it is corrosion or if it is some kind of impurity in the concrete mix attached to the cable?
Well, I mean, if you have what we are detecting is where you don't have the metal and you have, let's say, iron oxide, and it's not metallic. Now, if you have some other type of metallic material. I don't know how that will get into the tendons. If you have that, then that's a different question. But uh, uh, the condition of the concrete really doesn't influence the signal, because again, the permeability of the magnetic field is doesn't depend on the presence of the concrete or air or whatever. So what we are doing is basically we are detecting the where steel strand have corroded and there is a iron oxide or different type of corrosive material present.
Okay. The next one would how would magnetic flux leakage uh, differentiate between rebar and pre-stressing steel corrosion in a girder?
That's a question of the like internal tendons. Let me bring the this is a work that we did related to internal tendons. So you see, and we developed this kind. So these specimens that you see over here is made of these three put side by side, and the ducts basically are connected here. So we put different steel strands with different levels of the corrosion, and we were able to detect it. Now the way we do that now the question is that, okay, how do you detect the basically the how do you get rid of these the additional strands, the effect of the strands, because the strands could be corroded too. The way we have done that, first of all, we are using for the internal tendon, we use a permanent magnet, very heavy magnet. It's about 120 pounds. It's probably the most strongest permanent magnet that there is. So what we do is, let's say in this case, we magnetize. Let's say if I have a tension rod over here in one of these metal ducts, I put let's say 10 7-wire strands, and let's say a couple of them are corroded, and there are lots of mild reinforcement that could be present. So there could be a mild reinforcement on the top, going transfers, going longitudinal, and all that. So the way we do that is we magnetize the system, let's say from the bottom, but then we take the reading from the top. What it does, basically, when I magnetize from the bottom, I magnetize everything that's located between the bottom and the steel strand to a higher degree compared to what's up there. But when I take a reading from the top, because I have not magnetized the mild reinforcement, so I eliminate the effect of the mild reinforcement. Now, that's a very simplistic ways of explaining that, but that way we are able to eliminate the effect of the mild reinforcement that's around the steel strands that's embedded. Now you can do the same thing with the pre-stress girders and so on. You got to do a little more work in the case of the pre-stress girders, but that's how we've been able to eliminate the masking effect of the mild reinforcement that's around the steel strand.
Okay, we had one here. It says we recently had a case where we had to recommend strand inspection for possible corrosion for a segmental box girder for light rail transit and to do a conditional assessment. Anyway, they were wondering, could this work for duct and strand embedded in concrete? And they specifically asked, like in a blister with grouting.
Yeah, I showed, I don't know about the specific condition. For example, we've done lots of testing with, let's say, this kind of segmental concrete bridge segments. And like I said, we brought these segments from a field to the laboratory. And because there was this empty duct, we placed a steel strand with different amount of the corrosion, and we were able to detect it. So if you have this kind of condition, we can detect it. Now, the places that we are not able to do much is where you have a deviator or anchorage area. But if you have a straight portion, okay, the problem becomes a little more challenging too when you have two ducts one on top of each other's. Okay, usually in the walls, the walls are easier to detect. But if you have a condition similar to what you see over here, yes, we can inspect it. And if you have, of course, the external tendons, we are able to do that. Yep.
Okay, it's getting on to 7 after the hour. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jamal to pick up questions that came in during the Q&A. Jamal?
Thank you, Paul, Ken, and Aturad and Carlos. Great presentation, very relevant, really, for corrosion. We have only a few questions left that came in during the presentation. The first one for Aturad about MFL. They say, can the MFL method detect the sexual loss with pack rust attached to the strands? If there is a pack rust.
Yes, you can, as long as the metallic material has turned into some corrosive material, then you can detect it. Yes.
Good, good. The second question is, did experimentation include the corroded wire near the center of the bundle, either in ungrounded or grounded condition? And you talked about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. The question is that, for example, some of the experiments, let's say, for example, now first of all, our device has sensors all the way around. So Carlos is only showing 4 of them. There's a more sensor that's there. Now, usually in a duct, in the discussion that we have had with the states and the Florida DOT, usually the corrosion, the strands that are close to the surface or the other layers, that's where the corrosion happens. And when we have basically that condition, because we have many sensors, we are able to say where the corrosion activity is. Now, if you have, let's say, for example, if I have something right in the middle, that is very unlikely. It's the chance of having a rebar in the center of the duct to be corroded, we are told by the bridge inspector that it's not, that's rare. In those cases, it is a challenging. It's a challenging problem, and we may not be able to accurately say that there is a corrosion activity in the stress band. But usually, from the input, the feedback that we have had is the corrosion is usually at the other layers, and because we have many sensors, we are able to say actually where along the length and what portion of basically the duct there is a corrosion activity, possible corrosion activity.
There's another question also for Aturad. They say, in the case of no tendons, but the steel pipe conduit is corroded, did you investigate this case?
No, we have not done that. And the MFL has been applied. There are some non-destructive devices for pipe inspection based on the MFL. But no, this study that we did not investigate the steel pipe.
Okay. And I think this question here can apply also to Ken. How we know if the corrosion in the concrete, impurity in the concrete mix, or the cables?
Yeah, that would be, I think, maybe with further research, if we were to study that, we could look at the VOCs that might be emanating, either, if if we're doing a complementary technique, and again, this may not involve the canines, it may just be directly collecting the odor and then running instrumental analysis. You might be able to, I would suspect that you could potentially differentiate that, but that would be additional work that would have to be done.
I think, let me elaborate on this one. The MFL method, again, is detecting the section loss, where the steel turned into some corrosion product. Now, there are people have claimed that they can detect the corrosion where they identify with the different sound method where the cavity is. Now, we should note that the cavity, where you have the cavity, doesn't mean that you have a corrosion. There has been some cases where there has been some cavity, you open it up, actually you make the problem worse, because now you have the either oxygen and the moisture, or the moisture and not oxygen, and you've got both of them, and the corrosion starts. So if the question is that to detect the, let's say, the void, or let's say solve the different concrete quality, the grout quality is not, sometimes, I mean, the grout, especially internal tendons, has not been hardened after many years. Now, those are, MFL is insensitive to that. It doesn't differentiate between the solid concrete grout or something that has some kind of a problem with the grout. Again, those necessarily doesn't mean that you have a corrosion. You have a corrosion where steel strands turned because of the chemical actions, and the corrosion activity have turned into a non-metallic. And with the MFL, you are able to detect that. I hope that answers the question.
Great, Ken and Atarad. And that would be the end of the questions, Kathy.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you again to today's presenters, Dr. Zizamini and Dr. And also thank you to Carlos, even though he isn't with us today. It's a great presentation. We'd also like to thank Paul and Jamal for your moderating the Q&A today, and to all the participants for your interest and attendance, and for all of the great questions. Please join us for next month's monthly webinar on October 27th and the annual in-depth web training on September 8th. Our next quarterly research seminar will be on October 30th. With that, today's seminar is concluded. Thank you.